Make sure that you all have access to this later. Welcome to Power Rising Summer. In case you've never heard of Arena before, this is your first time with us. We are an organization that trains the next generation of candidates and campaign staff. We have four core services: training, careers, community, and toolbox. Today, we're going to be focusing a lot on the careers bucket, talking about resumes, ways that you can improve your existing resumes, or you're working on making a new one, how you can do that. We'll walk you through it step by step. But we also have so many other incredible services that we provide. You can learn more about those on our website. And we'll be talking about more of those services as we go through this training. Of course, we also have a lot of upcoming events. This is, of course, our resume training on the 15th. Last week, we had our career coaching week where members of our team with one. It was a really great time. We also did the workshop organizing where you lose space. Also, sort of a review of in the election, and so we'd love to see you there. And then next week, we're going to be doing another workshop on local political pressure and a book club meeting on Let the Radicalize You. Great book, and the discussion will be led by Arena's own Jessica and Kima. It's going to be a really great time. I'd love to see you there. Folks are already talking about it in the Slack, and so try to join that if you can. And we wouldn't hear it with sponsors. We have these incredible, great sponsors who power everything that we do and make it so that we can provide this free training tools to you. And we're focused on that set minute and launch a quick poll. Which of our partners are you interested involved with? We'd love to know. Please fill out this question. Isn't that put you in touch with these incredible organizations? This is something that we've been doing throughout Power Summer. We realize that in order to build power, we're going to need everyone. And that means y'all need to be connected with the organizations who are doing the work everywhere. So we're at 36 participated and get a little bit higher. And we're at 43%. Let's keep that on. Let's hit do it. Excellent. Oh, incredible. Absolutely lovely. Keep filling that poll out. Keep letting us know what partners you want to get involved with. And we're going to move right along into our resume training. That's what you're here for today. And in this goal, stand the specialized identity resume tell strongly, clearly, and concisely. We also want to identify which area you can start focusing on in your resume process. Know that we're on different places. We'll share tips for working. What's the number one goal of your books? Put it in the chat. What's the number one goal of your resume? Excellent. Some great job. Get an interview. Get hired. That's right. Like a lot of your answers were really good. You do want your resume to be able to get attention. You do want it to be able to communicate your experience, but we want to do those things in the interview. recommendations that happen to move on process. We're not open to that connection. And to find process. Simple. I also want to take time to note that we're going to be answering questions throughout the training. The best way for you to do that is to put your questions into the Q&A. You can find the three dots at the bottom of your Zoom more section, and you post questions. So where anonymous questions are allowed, and turn on voting questions. And so if there's a question that people want answered, I encourage that gets into the Q&A. And without further ado, let's over our resume improve this. But our place the rest of your resume and then making sure that the delivery is in tip-top shape so that when you send out your resume for we're going to be spending a good chunk of our time covering, and we'll spend some time on writing as well, and a little less time on delivery. Just because honestly, it should be the easiest part of the resume journey. But before we dive into any one of these four, I want to review some things about written. Oftentimes, hiring are skimming your resume for relevant experiences. They may even pass over resumes that are confusing. Sometimes hiring manager and for skills, but know what prioritizing resumes that are clear, concise, and readable. And oftentimes that means reading jargon specific than the before. All right, but it is the reality that we are going up against. And so we want to be sure that we are putting ourselves in the hiring manager's shoes as we review our resumes. This is the reality of hiring managers, especially in busy political cycles like the one that we're in right now in 2025, like the one that we're about to enter into in 2026, and of course, 2028 and 2027 are on the horizon. And so we always want to be thinking about the people who are reading our resumes as we build them. So let's talk formatting. We have a few tenets of good resume formatting. We dive a little bit more into this into our resume guide, but our tenets are pretty simple and straightforward. We want to make sure that we're using clear section headers with bullet points in each of those sections. We want to make sure that our organization, our role, and the location and time period are easy to find for each job that we have listed on our resume. And we want to make sure that we are embracing white space, typically by doing a single column. That way we are guiding the reader along the resume to keep it as concise and clear as possible. We also want to make sure that we are varying font size, making sure not to go below 10 points, and we want to make sure that our margins are no smaller than 0.5. Here is an example that kind of follows all of those tenets. And this is also our suggested format for resumes. We have this resume and a few other templates in the Arena toolbox, but we just want to make sure that we are including a header, a professional experience, additional experience if needed. This can be anything like roles that were in another field that you held previous to politics, or if you have never done professional political work before, you can list volunteer experiences in the additional experience section. You also want to make sure that you have a skills and education section as well. So with this suggested format and the tenets we just reviewed in mind, I want to review a resume. What exactly about this resume stands out visually? What do you notice about this resume when you look it over? And what do you think is challenging about this resume? What keeps it from being clear, concise, and readable?
There's not bullets, so it's more paragraph form, so I find it harder to read.
Correct, Shannon. Great point. Trey mentions it's 2 pages. Maxwell mentions it reads like a book, kind of like Shannon mentioned. There are these blocks of text, just like John mentioned as well. The name is really small. It's true, Sarah. There is a lot of white space. And I want to be clear that, like, while the white space is helpful in keeping to a kind of single column, you'll notice that, like, on a couple of these pages, it's split up, right? Like, you have your objective on one side, a paragraph on the other, education on one side, and it's kind of splitting the reader's attention. We want to make sure that, especially when we know that hiring managers are speed reading, we are keeping it all into a single column to make it as readable as possible. Andrea asks how effective are summary statements. Aziz provides a really good answer. Perfect. I love this quote. Summaries are like blueberries. They're great when they're done well and bad when they're bad. We want to make sure that if we are going to include a objective or summary statement, that we have a solid reason for doing so. So we just talked a lot about formatting. If you have any questions about formatting, I want to hear them now. I see that there's one question in the Q&A. Christina asks, is one page great question. One page, one digital page, or front and back printable? Great question, Christina. We want to make sure that it is exactly one page. And if you're printing it out, it should only be on the front. Now, this will change depending on your experience level. For example, folks who have 10 plus years of experience in a relevant field, y'all get the 2 page permission, right? I'm not like necessarily waving a magic wand saying that it's always the right thing to do, but I think that you have an opportunity to open up to 2 pages if you have 10 or more years of experience in a relevant role. And the keyword here is relevant roles, because we want to make sure that the jobs that we are applying for actually have some connection with the jobs that we are including in our resume. It's important to remember, folks, that when we're writing our resume is not a collection of all of the experiences we've ever done before, but what it is a collection of the roles and experiences that we've had that are relevant to the job that we are applying for. Awesome. Gonna keep moving on into narrative. Let me check the chat really quickly in case there are any other questions. I see Aziz is answering plenty. Becca asks, how would you list contract work? I have 5 contracts of work, 6 months each, separately listed on mine, but that does take up a lot of space, so 2 pages is needed. Would it be better to do one contract section? That's a really good question. I think that, like, for contractors, especially as you're applying for other contract roles, a contract section is great. Otherwise, I think if you're applying for a different role outside of the contractor space, you can simply list the position as contractor and then list the different uh, organizations or employers that you've worked with. Joseph, I think I'll leave that up to you as you're building your resume, but typically you want to make sure that it is at the top. So whether that means being in the header or being part of the page is less important than making sure that you have space for everything you're trying to fit. So use your gut, but when in doubt, do what lets you keep it to one page and one column. Awesome. We're going to move on into the narrative section. So we want to talk about how your story comes across in your resume, right? Because in the like To the point that I mentioned earlier, a resume can kind of serve the same function as a recommendation. It provides a reason as to why this person should be interviewed. And so your story, your resume's narrative, should be the reason why you should be selected for an interview. And so this comes across in the way that you categorize sections, in the way that you order your bullet points, in the way that you translate and tailor your experience. And what I mean by translate is that sometimes we have roles that, even if they're not in the explicit field that we're applying for, have translatable skills. They are translatable experiences because the things that we did in that past role apply to the role that we're looking to apply for, right? There are translatable skills, transferable skills, even. And so we want to make sure that we are including those in our resume, and especially in our resume's narrative. So as we are building our section headers throughout our resume, we want to make sure that we are grouping it by relevant experience sections, especially on campaigns. We want to make sure that we are always delineating between professional experience and volunteer experience. If you want, you can also make a specific section for a campaign experience. But I think what I really want you to walk away from this training knowing is that you always need to clearly delineate between professional and volunteer experience. Because if you try to pass volunteer experience as paid, this will not look good. I can guarantee that if you are in the interview process and someone asks about your professional experience that is actually volunteer, it will be an awkward moment for both you and the interviewing manager. This is not to say that volunteer experience isn't important, isn't valuable to hiring managers, but rather that you just don't want to be in that awkward position of like having to explain between the two. So just make it as clear as possible from the jump and include them in different sections if you have to. We also just want to make sure that each section is ordered chronologically because this can really help the hiring manager read through. I know that in every hiring process I've been through, if there has been like a really difficult resume to read because it's not ordered chronologically, I have a harder time understanding like how that person's career has progressed. We do not want to. I heard this example given. Like, we don't want to do like an indie movie resume where we are jumping between cuts in time. We want to make sure that it's just a straightforward narrative. And so the best way to do that is order it chronologically. You also get to control how much real estate that you give to each job. And this is applies to like the margins that shape the resume, but it also applies to how many bullets that we give each role. And so you can see in this example here that more bullet points are given to relevant roles like the organizing director and deputy organizing director, and only one bullet point is at the barista role. And this is only because it is slightly relevant to political experiences in that you open and closed shifts and have a brief description of what you did. But honestly, I think even in this example, right, this person does not need to include the barista role. But if it's really important to your narrative, to your story, that's a good enough reason to include it. We also want to make sure that we are tailoring our experience to the job that we are applying for. And by this, I mean that you want to look for what skills, strengths, and experiences you have that are required in the job description and using the language in the job description in your resume. This not only like directly helps hiring managers see the connection between you and the job that they posted, but it can also help bypass ATS systems because oftentimes people will use the language in the job description as a sort of filter to look for different resumes that have similar, or in some cases, even exact language. This is also why we want to avoid industry-specific jargon that is not the industry that we are applying into, right? Like if you're using political industry-specific jargon, that's one thing. That's more acceptable as long as you're applying for political roles. But if you were, let's say, in academic research, you may not want to use industry-specific jargon in the case of applying for a campaign manager role. Just because if it's like the hiring manager has never been in an academic research position, they're going to have a hard time understanding your experience. And so we want to make sure that we are thinking of our hiring manager when writing our resumes. Here's an example. I think this is like a really well done example. Plus, there are plenty of people who have made the jump from working in theater to working in politics. Like, let's say you've, in the theater world, executed 20 or more stage productions. That is pretty comparable to leading staff and volunteers to execute 20 plus community events. Same with these other two bullet points for translating youth acting classes to training young people how to tell authentic stories or increasing event turnout by 25%, right? Like what we want to focus on are the different metrics and different keywords that we can use to make sure that the hiring manager understands our experience. This is also just a really great example of using metrics in a resume. We'll dive more into that in a bit. So that was the narrative section of our resume. Gonna dive into the Q&A and see what questions folks have. Carolyn asks, I have 3 roles with the same company with a few other campaigns sandwiched in between. Can I put everything with that company as one header? Yes, Carolyn, you should be able to do that. Uh, and specifically listing the most recent role at the top and then going in chronological order from there. Dara asks, do I need to delineate between academic experience and political/campaign experience? Or is academic experience like grants, project management, etc., even useful for these resumes? This is a really good question. And I think it really depends on the job that you're applying for. Like if you're applying for a grant writing position with a nonprofit, then academic experience writing grants, doing project management can be really helpful. And so what I want you to do is make sure to always read the job description. And if you are finding relevant skills, relevant experiences that you've had in that job description, then that gives you the okay to include it in your resume. Great question, Dara. Okay, I'm gonna go through the chat really quickly. Would it be appropriate to copy and paste a couple of the job descriptions into your resume, then elaborate on it with your experience? This is a tough one. I wouldn't say copy and paste it directly, just because I really want to encourage you to like critically think about what you are including in your resume. And so I would not advise you to just like blindly copy and paste and then elaborate on it. I would really encourage you to write it yourself, because you never want to be in a position where the things in your resume are things that you don't think to say, right? We want our resume to be aligned with the things that we would say in an interview or in like any other context. And so I'd avoid copy and pasting, but that said, using specific keywords, using specific action verbs, these are all recommended. Haley says, I don't want to read my job description in the resume, but I do need help understanding how your work experience is what I'm looking for. 100% Haley. See, Aziz is also answering questions. Appreciate you. Gonna do a quick check. Again, folks, make sure that you get some of these questions in the Q&A section. That'll really make sure that I get to them in between each of these sections. So let's talk about writing in your resume. We want to make sure that we are using strong active verbs. And by this, we have a few examples. Managed, led, trained, all of these active verbs are really good. I do believe that either Yale or another one of the Ivies have a list of really great action verbs that are good to include in your resume. The reason that we want to include these active verbs is like we want to accurately explain what we did without just listing daily job responsibilities, right? Like you could say, oh, I wrote out the calendar for an executive in my assistant role. Or you could say that you planned out the schedule for an executive, and that gives like just a little more oomph to the reading of for the hiring manager, right? But we also want to use active verbs that are in the job description that we're applying for. Like Haley said, this isn't a simple matter as like copying and pasting, but in some cases there are some like specific active verbs that we want to use over others. I think a really good example is like mobilizing versus organizing. I think that there's, definitely a difference between the two, with organizing being more about building lasting relationships in the community that you're working in, whereas mobilizing is getting people to show up for a specific cause or action. And using those two words in different places can demonstrate what knowledge that you have in the field that you're applying for. Like if you're applying for an organizer role, knowing the difference between mobilizing and organizing can be really helpful. We also want to make sure that we are quantifying our experience. And by this, what I mean is like using metrics. And so we don't want to just include metrics that describe our day to day. We want to include metrics that describe the achievements that we've had on the job. So, for example, here we have managed budget for red to blue state Senate race, mobilized volunteer leaders and volunteers, drafted comms plan, and landed pieces in local and national newspapers. Even though this person is using strong active verbs, each of these bullet points is kind of lacking something. And that's something is scale. We want to make sure that the bullet points that we provide a scale for the work that we are able to do. So for this example, we have some metrics added, where this person managed and drafted a budget of over $1 million for red to blue state Senate race. They mobilized 52 volunteer leaders and 1,875 volunteers in the state's largest congressional district. And I want to use that second bullet point as a really great example because sometimes adding metrics isn't just about having numbers, it can be about adding context. So in this previous one, the second bullet point gave no context for where this person was mobilizing volunteer leaders and volunteers. But in the second example, we see that it's in the state's largest congressional district. And even though, there's no number in that phrase, it gives us a clearer picture of the scale that the person was working at. And in this third example, we see that they've drafted comms plan and landed 9 feature articles in local newspapers, as well as 2 cover stories in national publications. Again, we have more examples of non-number achievements, like getting things into the local paper as well as national publications, instead of like just landing pieces in local and national newspapers. Being specific about what we are getting into print and where we got it into print. Here's another example. Feel free to take like a screenshot of this if you want. These are like a couple examples of like what good bullet points look like and what bad bullet points look like. And so single sentences with 1 to 3 lines, with 1 to 2 being the sweet spot, that's a trademark of good bullet points. And the reason that's the case is because if you go any longer or if you go with like a paragraph style, you suddenly have a really hard time getting things to one page. I've seen it a million times where if folks would just use single sentences instead of paragraphs, their resume suddenly transforms from like 3 pages to 1 page. Similarly, we want to use metrics that demonstrate capacity and context and achievements instead of just day-to-day job responsibilities. We want to make sure that we are featuring consistent formatting across the resume, and not that each bullet point has like a different color or shape or indentation. The reason that I mention this is because, again, we want to make sure that we are being clear and concise in our resume and keeping to one column. Now, like if you need to do an indented bullet point to like add some additional information, that's not a bad thing, right? I don't want to say that you shouldn't do that, but make sure that you have a good reason. Are you providing context for an achievement or a metric that demonstrates your capacity? In that case, I think you can include that. But if it's not adding context, if it's not adding something to the resume, why take away that space? So now we've gotten to the delivery section. I'm gonna take a minute. I'm gonna jump into the Q&A section. Someone says, I worked at Fox, notoriously not a progressive institution, and I left because of the toxic environment. Good job. That's a hard thing to do sometimes. But the job title was a great resume ad. Is there any reason that I should avoid listing that title? Would it be a turnoff to these progressive companies I'm trying to work with and join the fight? That's a really tough question. And, you know, first of all, kudos to you for walking away from that role. I know that can be really hard. Walking away from any job can be really difficult because, like, to imagine something different is always a challenge. As for whether or not you should include it, I think that'll have to be up to you. Is it a part of your story about how you walked away from Fox and how you walked away from that lifestyle, that philosophy? Is that part of your story and why you came to the progressive movement? If it's not, if you were just like kind of working there just to work there and moving to another place, I think you could get away with listing a like media company. Uh, that said, I think like if you can include it in your story, if you can shape your narrative in a compelling way, I would say include it, right? There's no reason not to. And especially if the title that you have is like a really good one, I think I wouldn't want you to lose that experience and not get counted for a job for having less experience than you actually do. It's a really tough question, though. I'd follow your gut on that one. Shannon asks, similar to Carolyn, I've got 3 roles in the same company, but with each promotion, so I've included all of them as the role included more responsibility. As long as I keep it to one page, this works. Yes, Shannon, that should work. Maxwell asks, I'm a recent graduate with political science background. Let's go poli sci and experience in grassroots activism, including canvassing. I'm looking to pivot my resume more towards strategic roles in campaigns like operations, research, or comms, rather than field organizing or canvassing. What language, accomplishments, or types of experience should I highlight to position myself for those more strategic roles, especially as someone just starting out? Or is this not a realistic goal? That's a really good question, Maxwell. And I think it can be really tough, right? Because we've all had to make that jump from contributor to management, and it can be really difficult, especially if we don't have exactly the right experience that a hiring manager is looking for. That said, I think in terms of language that you can use, you want to use language that shows that you understand your role from a strategic level. Do you understand how you as an organizer were contributing to the overall campaign plan or the overall organizing plan? Are you able to demonstrate that you understand you played a key function on the team? Can you show that you have that view from like the thousandth foot, right? To use an often used term. It can be really difficult, and that's why we want to use metrics that demonstrate we understand the context that we're working in and the scale that we've worked in before. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that helps. I think I would also talk to folks who have had the job that you are looking to get into, like these more strategic roles. And a great way to do that is to use Arena Connections. This is like a networking platform that we've created so that mentors and mentees can sign up to get connected. And so you can get connected with someone who has a more strategic role like the one that you're looking for. And in this instance, I would have them review your resume and maybe even review their resume or even review their LinkedIn, right? Like we have to understand that like while job descriptions are free information that is out there and available to us, so are the thousands of people who are on LinkedIn who have the jobs that you want. See how they've described their jobs. See how they've put that information and use that to frame your own writing in the resume. Hope that answers your question. How about listing a position where you were terminated? I think that should be fine so long as you weren't terminated for like salacious reasons. Like there are all sorts of reasons why people are terminated. I would again like really use your gut instinct and when in doubt, talk to a mentor, talk to someone in your network, uh, and try to figure it out that way. I unfortunately do not have a blanket answer to give you. How would we go about adding metrics from past campaigns? I don't remember specifics like number of volunteers trained, event attendance, turnout, etc. This is a really good question, and there are two ways that I want you to tackle this. The first is to talk to other people on that campaign to understand, like, what are they including in their resume, right? Like, when in doubt, it is okay to sometimes, like, I used to be like a teacher in another life, or a substitute teacher. Look at your classmates' paper, uh, especially for folks who have worked on similar or the same campaign. That said, hiring managers are not trying to get the specific exact number. There's nothing wrong with doing a ballpark estimate as it goes. Just like if you did 30 folks at an event, don't list 50 or 100. List 30 with like a plus or a tilde, and you should be just fine. Are there any hiring managers here? I believe so. Haley mentioned it in the chat. How important are cover letters? I hate that we have turned to these for hiring. If a cover letter is recommended and we don't submit it, are we hurting our application? When I was hiring people, I refused to look at them. I think it's tough, right? Because we have people like you who refuse to look at them, even though making them mandatory for a job application. Uh, so in one way, I would advise that you be the change you want to see in the world. That said, like if a cover letter is recommended and you don't submit it, I would have a hard time as a hiring manager not seeing that as you did not do all that you could for this job application. And so no matter how your cover letter is, you will be doing less work to apply for the job compared to those who do turn in a cover letter, even if they never read the cover letter, right? It does suck though. I'm not gonna lie. Like writing cover letters is really annoying. But that said, if the job is saying that it's recommended or even mandatory, then you should treat it as important you should treat it as if it's as important as the actual application itself. I'm gonna quickly check the chat here. We're doing really well on time. Okay. Not seeing any questions that don't have answers yet. If you have a question that you have not dropped in the chat or the Q&A, please drop it in the Q&A. I'd love to get to it. But for now, we're going to keep on going through delivery. So when you are applying, we recommend, for the best case scenario when you are applying, to always use PDFs. This is just because, like, sometimes whether using Microsoft Word or even a Google Doc, sometimes the formatting can get garbled. And PDFs, more or less, tend to stay the most consistent as you send them out into the world. And so we always recommend that you download and send your resume as a PDF. And when you are sending out that PDF, put a little bit of effort, take the few seconds that it takes to make sure that it's formatted correctly. Make it as easy to find as possible for someone who might be reading your resume. Like in this example, you don't want resume version 7 to be going out into the world because that doesn't even have your name attached. You also don't want your resume being new or like Jay Bartlett new for those West Wing fans out there, right? Because we want to show that we are not only formatting our resume with our name, but also like the month, the year. These can just be helpful things that show we are considering our hiring manager as we're sending this out. I know it takes a few extra seconds, but this can really help hiring managers find your resume amid the stack. And so that's kind of it for the delivery section. Like I said earlier, it's one of the shortest sections. We're going to be diving into networking next, and just a few tips that you can use in your networking to make sure that you're putting your resume out. I want to make sure that I'm not missing any Q&A. Anonymous says, I've had organizers tell me they looked for interns and fellows with retail experience to demonstrate strong communication and workplace adaptability skills. Do you think those experiences are still relevant for most political positions? I think especially for organizer roles, because like those tend to be the jobs that call for strong communication and workplace adaptability, and also like bringing a customer service mindset to this work, because so much of political work does revolve around having a customer service mindset, right? We are serving the public in a lot of these roles, and so being able to do that is really important. And so, yeah, I'd say that they're still relevant, but as you get more political roles, they become less and less relevant. I was told by several hiring managers to use a very basic formatted Word document because some AI scanners have a hard time reading PDFs. That's a good point. I can't account for every AI scanner, and so I would use your best judgment. Um, I do know that Word documents often scramble the formatting. I'll say that much. Especially if the person does not have like Microsoft Word downloaded, they're going to have a really hard time reading your resume. So use your gut judgment there, but I definitely recommend PDFs. Christina asks, is there an X amount of time recommended for each tailoring process for cover letter and resume? My attempts at refining are slowing down my ability to apply for multiple roles. Really good question. I think that there's not necessarily X amount of time, but there are some check boxes that you want to make sure that you hit. You want to make sure that for your resume, you are including things that are in the job description or are otherwise relevant to the job that you're applying for. So, however much time it takes for that to happen is how much you need. For your cover letter, here is like a basic outline that I recommend to folks. Explain who you are, explain what you've done, explain what you want to do. And these, like, that can be just 3 paragraphs: who you are, what you've done, what you want to do, and using that third paragraph to connect what you want to do with why you want to work for this employer. So that's what I would recommend. For me, like having those 3 steps really makes it like take less time. But that said, like you also want to make sure that you are not over applying for jobs. And by this, I mean you want to make sure that you are giving each application the attention that it needs, not necessarily the time. And I think this scales depending on whether or not you have a connection at the organization that you're applying to. And so when people come to me for coaching, which is something that we provide for arena trained staff, I recommend that folks do about 5 applications a week if each of those 5 is a job that they have a connection with, and 10 applications a week if they have no connections at any of those places. That should sort of help you determine how much time each application deserves. And again, like this will vary depending on your circumstances, right? If you are currently working a role, if you are a parent, if you have some other activity that takes up a lot of your time, it's going to look different. There's no one size fits all, unfortunately. I've had a hard time finding roles in my primary field, and I'm looking to transition into project management or operations. I have experience with these, except they weren't the primary focus of my jobs. What do you think about functional resumes that focus more on skills than employment history? This is a really good question, and it kind of taps into what we've been saying during this entire training. And by that I mean, your resume is not a list, it is not a complete employment history. What it is a demonstration of your experience that is relevant to the job. And so, what do I think about functional resumes that focus more on skills? I think those are good, especially the ones that include metrics and other details that provide context to the job that you're applying for. Okay, those are all in the Q&A section. I'm going to take a quick glance into the chat. Love canvases and organizers. You had me with those first 5 words. Me too, Carolyn. Okay, okay. Job application. I see Aziz is also answering a lot of questions. Thank you, Aziz. We really do have an incredible team at Arena. Awesome. All right, take a deep breath. If you've been working on your resume through this training, great. take this moment to put it to the side right now. We're going to talk a little bit about networking, and then I'll answer some more questions. So here is a slide that we've taken from Michael Meltzer, who is this incredible career coach at that like arena has had talk before, and he talks a little bit about the different relationships that you need in order to succeed. And by this, I mean that you can sort your existing relationships into one of these seven categories. You have weak ties. You can think of these as like acquaintances. You have sponsors and mentors, colleagues, bosses and senior stakeholders, clients, friends, and beneficiaries. And something that I love that Michael mentions is that weak ties are often some of the most important and the most often neglected relationships that we have. I think we've all had an experience where like a very loose connection that we had ended up playing a pivotal role, recommending us for a role that we really wanted. So it's important that we want to maintain these weak ties because they can often make or break the difference just because you never know who you know unless you're taking active efforts to sort and categorize these relationships. And I want to take a moment to say that like this can feel really alien, right? We exist under capitalism. We exist in a digital world. It can feel really tough sometimes to like have to categorize our relationships in this way. It can feel a little inhuman. It can be really tough to feel like you're selling yourself, which is a disturbing phrase when taken out of context. But really, this is just like a few minutes that you can take out of each day, out of each week, to make sure that you are giving yourself the best chances to get your next role. That's what we want to focus on. So when hold on. I think this slide snuck in here. Yeah, okay. These two slides snuck in here. That's my mistake. Let's focus on how we can reach out and maintain those weaker ties. Here are the basic components of an intro message or email, and you can use these to build messages that you can use to send out to folks on LinkedIn, on other social media platforms, always keeping in mind to like be appropriate. That's why LinkedIn is like the place to do it if you're going to do it. But we basically want to make sure that we are quickly introducing ourselves, telling them what we're looking to learn and ask a question, show them how their experience is relevant, and ask for a meeting and make sure to follow up, right? It costs us nothing to bump a social media message, except maybe a little awkwardness, maybe a little shame. But I think anyone here who has like worked in organizing can tell you that shame is more often a blocker than it is a contributor. Put shame to the side for a second. We need to focus on getting our next role and advancing our career. I've always found it really helpful when someone like points out a connection that I have with them, even if it's like a similar interest in an organization or skill. I'm more likely to look and respond to that message than I am any others. Although I do try to respond to all messages, uh, I want to encourage everyone here to use these components and send me an intro message on LinkedIn. My name on LinkedIn is June Borst. You can find me that way. I work with Arena. Send me a message. And if you want, I can rate that message and I can give you some notes on how you can improve it. I'm happy to do that for you, free of charge. Do not pay people to format your LinkedIn messages. Small, small plug there. Here is an intro example, kind of using the similar components that we have. We want to make sure that we are establishing who we are up front, tell the person why they are a good fit or what the connection is here, and then make a specific ask, especially to meet, right? This is often the best way that we can give a first impression that really counts. And so make sure to really give it that extra oomph, make the ask. I know it can be awkward, I know it can be scary, but if it can get you your next role, if it can get you that advancement in the career that you want, endure the shame, endure the awkwardness, go for it. Last but not least, I want to talk about the ping, and this can be a way to maintain the connections that we already have. And so when you're reaching out, you want to reach out without signaling that you need a response. You can think of the ping as like a reminder that you exist. Hey, Sharon, I passed by our coffee place and I thought of you. Dreary weather is happening here today. You made the right move by moving. There are a bunch of other, like two other examples here. But basically, what you do with a ping is you want to mention what, you want to mention a why, and you want to mention the how you thought of them. And out of all of these, the how is really the important, right? You want to reemphasize that connection. You want to remind them of the memories that you shared. If you're messaging a coworker about a place that you used to visit, that's a really great way to do that. But this is just to make sure that we are maintaining these relationships that we've accumulated, especially like when we've let them drift sometimes, right? I'm sure I'm not the only one who has like text messages that I've forgotten to respond to, and we're not we all have some text messages that maybe have not gotten a response. And so if you don't want to reach out to that person and say, "Why haven't you responded to me?" The ping is a great way to get back in touch. So, this is the end of our training. I have a few links here about different resources that we have, not only to help you with your job application process, but just to make some network connections and broaden your horizons. But while these links are really important and we can drop them in the chat, I know that questions are also really important. And so I want to answer those with the time that we have. And so, if you are only here for the training, we have reached the end of our training. I think on Mobilize, we listed this as like going an extra half hour to 1:30 Central or 2:30 Eastern time. I don't know what it is Pacific. I'll admit it. And so I have a little bit more time to answer some questions. I'm going to open the Q&A section first. And when I'm done with those questions, I am going to, come on, I don't want to target focus mode. There we go. I'll dive into the ones into the chat. You recommend applying for 5 to 10 jobs a week. I rarely see 5 to 10 jobs relevant to my experience and or goals. In that case, you do not have to do 5 to 10 jobs per week. If you need help finding jobs that are relevant to your experience and or goals, I'd recommend using our jobs board. It can be really helpful. But again, like keep in mind the context that you are living in, right? Like any advice that I can give should be filtered through the context of your experience. Trey mentions, I was wondering about bullet point congruity. Should I maintain my current uniform 4 to 5 bullet points for each job, or would it be worthwhile to highlight more recent responsibility added? Would it look bizarre to have 7 bullet points for one description, 4 for another, and 2 for example? Or would my resume look cleaner with more uniformity? It's a really good question, Trey. I think it does look better with uniformity. That said, I think you do want to dedicate the most space to the most relevant information. I think we even did a slide kind of like that. I'm going to zoom. There we go. I think that like you can allocate, excuse me, you can allocate the space however you need to. Like in this example here, this person has 5 bullet points for their organizing director role and only one for this Koava coffee role. And so it depends on what story you're trying to tell, but I would always try to aim to provide more information for the jobs that are most relevant and less for the jobs that are least relevant. That said, uniformity can look cleaner, and so keep that in mind as you make those decisions. When reaching out for informational interviews, do you think cold emailing or LinkedIn messages would be more successful than if I'm trying to reach out to someone at a larger organization? Should I reach out to an entry-level associate or researcher versus a higher-up supervisor or director? I think when you are faced with this dilemma, excuse me, when you're faced with this dilemma, I would advise casting a wider net than a smaller net, right? Like aim for messaging as many people that are relevant to you and your job search, because you never know who will respond. Sometimes an entry level associate might respond more often than a supervisor. Sometimes it's the opposite. So why not message them both? That said, if you want to like work your way up the ladder of awkwardness, it can definitely be easier to message someone who has a position similar to one that you've had in the past. Hope that helps. Michael asks, can you confirm if Thursday's session is at 12 p.m. or 1 p.m. EST? I believe it is at 1 p.m. EST. If I have said 12 p.m., it's because it's 12 p.m. Central, and I live in Central Time. Sorry about that. Where do I put or should I put extracurriculars? This is a really good question, Asha, and I've kind of struggled with it as well, even in my own job applications. I think if you have space for extracurriculars, it doesn't hurt to include them, to include a little flavor, but you should always prioritize listening to your skills and professional experience. That said, put it at the bottom. And the reason I say that is because it is not more important than anything else listed on your resume, and it could even be like a little treat for someone who made it to the bottom of your resume. Ooh, I saw one more question pop up. For the job fair on Thursday, will you be sending out a list of employers that are participating in the jobs they are hiring for? We to just to be completely honest and transparent with you, getting employers to these can be really difficult, and so if we have a final list ready before the event, we will. Chances are we may not, just because we don't know necessarily uh, if we can herd all of the cats into the careers fair by the time that it starts. What I can promise you is that after the event, we will be sending out that list so that you have access to it, as well as like an email that the person who attended from the organization provided so that you can get in touch with them. Fabulous. I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. No worries, Carolyn. Yes, this recording will be available. Fabulous. Oh, I see two more questions popped up in the Q&A. Will the spec from today be sent out? It sure will. How big of a deal are gaps in work experience in a resume? Since I've been a stay-at-home parent for a few years, is it worth putting in my resume, or should I leave that gap? This is a really good question, Jason. I would say that including more information is better than none. Just because you will be asked about it in an interview if you are selected. Um, that said, like, I would not say that they are always a big deal. If it's like only been a few years, I think that should be fine, especially if it's something as important as being a stay-at-home parent. Honestly, what's most important is not the gap in work experience, but whether the experience that you have is relevant to the job that you're applying for. Can I send my resume to you? Chris, you can, because you are an arena trained staffer, and any other arena trained staffers on this call can send their resume to me. If you send an email to careers@arena.run, we can get some time on the calendar to do a group coaching where we can all review resumes or other career related specifics together. So reach out. I'll send a Calendly link and we can get in touch. All right. It's 1 p.m. Central, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all your lovely faces. Thank you all for joining me here today. I really appreciate it because if it wasn't for you, I would simply be sitting here in an empty Zoom. Make sure that you continue to attend our Power Rising summer events. I'll see you at the Careers Fair. And until then, have a great day. Does this training count as an arena training? I'm afraid not, unfortunately. We do events called academies, and those are the trainings that I mean. Like when you graduate from one of our academy programs, then you are able to apply for things like group coaching. That said, if you email me your resume, I'll probably take a look at it when I can. Thanks, y'all.